So I'm going to start a session today. So welcome our Chulalongkorn University Council Committees, Management Executive and Risk Management Champions to the Lighthouse class entitled Significant Risks Facing Higher Education, Lesson Learned from Deloitte Reports on Enterprise Risk Management, organizing by Chula Risk Management Center. The purpose of today's virtual seminar is to highlight key risks facing higher education, taking an enterprise approach to risk management. Effective enterprise risk management will help envisioning a more forward-looking and prepare higher education to strategize its actions and respond more effectively to crises and uncertainties in order to survive and thrive. We are very grateful to Dr. Supamit, one of our University Council committees and also the Deloitte partners, to help us connecting with the Deloitte team from the United States. And today we are very honored to have two distinguished guest speakers for us, which I will introducing both of them now. So let's starting with Ms. Cynthia Witters. She is the Managing Director at Deloitte Touch Limited Liability Partnership with over 20 years of higher education, federal governments, and enterprise risk management experiences. She leads Deloitte's government and public service enterprise risk management practice and oversees ERM engagement for federal, state, and local government and higher education clients. Prior to joining Deloitte, Cynthia served as the CRO for the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Federal Student Aid, or FSA. In the CRO position, she oversaw all aspects of the identification and assessment of enterprise risks. Prior to joining the FSA, Cynthia spent 8 years with the U.S. Office of Inspector General, Atlanta Regional Office, managing internal performance audits of multi-billion-dollar federal funded education programs and audits of colleges and universities administration of Title IV programs. Additionally, she served as an advisor on the Department of Education agency-wide enterprises risk management implementation efforts. Cynthia holds a Bachelor's of Arts from Franklin and Marshall College and a Master of Business Administration from Georgia State University. Additionally, Cynthia is a graduate of the Senior Executive Fellows Program at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. She is currently a Vice President at Large of Association for Federation Enterprise Management and was named the 2015 ERM Professional of the Year by AFERM. Thank you very much, Cynthia, for being our guest speakers today. And our second speaker, Jake Browndoff, is a manager within Deloitte Risk and Financial Advisory Practice, and he has over 10 years of risk management experiences in the federal government, higher education, and private sector industries. Jake advises clients on managing and financial risks, specifically specializing in the areas of internal control, compliance, and enterprise risk management. Jake is also a leader within the higher education, ERM practice, and charged with coordinating thought leadership, client relationships, and overall practice development across Deloitte. He has experiences in advising federal agencies of how to manage financial risks that involve exposure to private sector companies. These involve providing creditors advisory services, affordability analysis, and settlement negotiation analysis and support. He also has payment integrity experiences, specifically in improper payment testing and advising federal agencies on compliance with the Improper Payment Elimination Recovery Act, or IPERA lifecycle. He has led risk assessment and support the development of corrective actions to manage strategic, operational, and financial risks across large federal agencies. Jake is a trust advisor to his client on compliance matters. Prior to joining Deloitte, Jake worked in the aerospace and defense industry, holding various roles in finance, planning, and analysis, internal audit, and compliance. Jake holds a Master of Business Administration from George Washington University and a Bachelor's of Science with a Majors in Finance from the Florida State University. He also has a Project Management Professional or PMP. So thank you very much, our two speakers today. So let me introduce myself. My name is Natcha Tuisangsukunthai. I am a Vice President for Strategic Planning, Innovation, and Global Engagement of Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. I'm going to be a host for today's Lighthouse Classes, a virtual seminars organized by Chula Risk Management Center. Let me briefly explain Chulalongkorn University. Chulalongkorn University is founded in March 1917 as Thailand's first institution of higher education. Chulalongkorn University is a comprehensive and a research-intensive university ranked as the best university in Thailand in many surveys, such as the recent one, QS 2021, regarding quality of students, quality of research, university reputation, environmental management system, and so on. Moreover, CU is the only Thai university which is a member of Association of Pacific Rims University, and we consisting of 19 faculties, 3 colleges, 1 school, and many research institutes. We have over 3,000 faculties with outstanding and international, national and international awards, and approximately about 38,000 undergrad and postgrad students. Our alumni position in the world-renowned public and private institutions. Our vision by 2024 is to be a leader creating knowledge and innovations for sustainable society. So today we are very grateful to your valuable time in sharing with us your reports on significant risks facing higher education. So could you please, Cynthia and Jake, could you please sharing with us your report findings? We would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think just to get things started, Jake's gonna put up the other slide deck. But thank you so much for the warm introduction and of both of us, and we're really happy to be here with you today. So just to get things started, wait 1 second.
It looks like it's been disabled for me to share. If you want to share and we can say next slide, that's fine. We're prepared to do that. The deck that I had sent over this morning or last night. Thank you.
Started, we wanted to just first spend some time together, or just I guess to orient you, when we spend our time together this morning or this evening for you all, we're going to discuss both the risks that we identified, that are facing the higher education industry today, but we also want to spend some time talking about how they could or can be addressed through effective enterprise risk management. To get things started, I want to first introduce you to the concept of enterprise risk management. Many of you may be very familiar with it, but for anyone who isn't, the whole concept of ERM it's a discipline that does affect and address the full spectrum of an organization's risks, which includes both challenges and opportunities, and integrates them into an enterprise-wide and strategically aligned portfolio. And when using ERM, effectively, it contributes to improved decision-making, and it also can support the achievement of an organization's mission, goals, and objectives. And, as you can see on this slide, the whole concept is to create a structure that will get the right information to the right people at the right time to help them make better decisions. Some of the benefits that you see, and we'll talk through these as we work through each of the significant risk issues today, it will help result in fewer crises, more consistency and decision-making, reputational resilience, improved performance, data, improved data usage, and also covering, the full spectrum of risks that the organization faces. So if you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. And again, this one is just to kind of orient you to, putting these concepts together. Just take a few minutes to talk about, as we spend our time together, we're going to talk through some of the most significant risks that we identified. And so what we'll do is we'll walk you through each topical area of risk. So Jake will introduce the risk topic, and then I'll provide some food for thought around how an effective enterprise risk management program could help the organization be better prepared and possibly even mitigate each of these risks before they are fully realized. A little bit of background on the paper. We developed this point of view after speaking with many of our clients about the risks that they were seeing in the higher education industry. The velocity is increasing as well as the diversity of these risks. We pulled together a very cross-functional team of subject matter experts to start to think through the array of each of these risks, and then started to bucket them into what we sometimes call a risk taxonomy. So the way that we've broken them down into these categories sort of is synonymous with the risk taxonomy. And the paper has largely shaped our view of risk, and it's important to also note that these risks continue to evolve. So, we continue to revisit this. We're right now in the process of updating this to identify any new risks that have emerged, especially given COVID-19. So with that, I'm going to ask Jake to turn it over to Jake and have him start us walking through the first risk, business model risk.
Cynthia, we go to the next slide there on business model risk. Thank you. So business model risks really challenge the ability of an institution to generate that revenue. These risk factors can impact the sustainability and obviously the relevance of an institution when it comes to education delivery model, revenue generation, or enrollment. Institutions that do not plan for these risks may find themselves in an increasingly challenging position relative to more agile competitors. So if we go to the next slide, the paper is organized, as you know, with some sub-risk factors. And I'm going to pick and choose two of them here today that are relevant, and then toss it back over to Cynthia. So the first one is tuition dependency. Some schools that are dependent on income from tuition from students to sustain cash flow operations are heavily obviously dependent on those students that continue to come, and where schools that have tuition being the primary source of revenue, there's growing concerns that as students' priorities shift and rising cost of education, where students may be looking elsewhere or to spend their time, the school may be at odds in terms of operations going forward. And then there's also a school of thought in terms of diversifying revenue and looking at new revenue streams. So looking to be a more sustainable institution. And then the second one is education delivery mix. And there's a trend here that follows a lot of these declining, a lot of the declining enrollment, and that these in-person programs and what institutions would need to do to deliver that kind of education relative to delivering a alternative delivery model, such as a hybrid model or online. There are certain risks associated with each of those, and as a university shifts from more in-person to a hybrid or online delivery model, there are certainly risks that are related to that transition and the quality of material and the type of education that's being delivered. So a university should be thoughtful when they're making that transition as well. Cynthia, can you contextualize a little bit on how our ERM could help with some of these business model risks?
Yeah, thanks, Jake. And, first say that with all of these risks that we'll discuss today, clearly having an effective enterprise risk management program and or process in place, it just helps be better prepared, by already having thought through what the potential issues are. And then subsequently, you're typically better prepared to respond to these risks when they do occur. The one that I'm going to talk a little bit about in more detail is the delivery model risk. And why I'm going to talk about that is, largely because we're seeing in the higher education industry that, it was one of the most significant risks that institutions had to pivot on with, COVID-19. And, what we saw was that some institutions that, had already really thought through the issue of delivery mix were much better prepared to respond when COVID-19 happened because they immediately had to shift their entire, way of delivering educational services to an online model. And again, same concepts apply where, contingency plans had been put in place. They had already thought through, some of the impact of doing that, and were able to, pull, I guess I'd also say pull the right people together at the right time, which is also a very important part of enterprise risk management, is not only being able to pull in, a chief financial officer, but also the technology officer, and, the dean to make quick decisions. So I think that, again, being better prepared and having a plan in place for some of the key components of how ERM can help. So Jake, back to you for the next topic, which is reputational risk.
Yes, thanks, Cynthia. So on the next slide here, we introduce reputational risk. So reputations are all about trust, and the more trusted the reputation, the more fragile it is and susceptible to threats and disruptions. So when you lose it, and their studies have shown that it can take up to 2 years or longer to actually recover from that. So institutions with reputational awareness and control over their presence within the media can sustain some of the damage that they've spent years building if an event is to occur. So on the next slide here, we have a couple of sub-risk factors here, and I want to chime in on 2 of these. Campus safety and campus safety and related functions need to be prepared for a wide range of risks. Campuses operate largely within the community in which they're located. And when events occur, there needs to be swift action on behalf of both the victim and also the institution, so that they can reduce the backlash from media that comes with such an event. And the second one that is tied, somewhat closely related to campus safety, unfortunately, is student activism some of the time. As there's an increase in the use of social media, students can mobilize much quicker than they have in the past. And it gives, institutions give students an opportunity to express themselves and encourage, them to formulate their own positions on issues. But what that brings, though, is that there's conflict sometimes on campus, and having a good pulse on what students are doing, if they're gathering, and really the position that the university is taking relative to the student activism really means all of really means everything in terms of how the university handles the event. So keeping a keen eye on both of those are really important to maintain a university's reputation. Cynthia, on some of how ERM can help with this.
Yeah, so a couple key things that I want to bring up. And the first is that, there are many advanced ERM tactics. And when I say that, I mean, they're really probably more considered advanced analytical tools that serve to, really support some specific components of risk, one being reputational. And so the one that I want to talk about, there's a technology that we often deploy as part of an enterprise risk management program called risk sensing. And the intent of that technology is to get ahead of reputational risk issues. It pulls across, social media sites, actually thousands of them. And it actually has an ability to trend how conversations are going in the news and media around, are the conversations trending in a negative way so that the university may need to react more quickly to something that could, create a negative reputational impact? Or, is it something that seems bad, but, the conversation might just go away and stop, after a few days? And so that's an actual tool, technology, analytical piece that we use that supports an enterprise risk management program, very specifically to help get ahead of reputational risk issues. The other thing that I'd just, say more broadly is that, in having an enterprise risk management program in place, I mean, again, you're more prepared, better able to respond when a risk does occur. The thing that we've seen with reputational issues is higher education institutions who have kind of thought through this often have as a risk mitigation plan, some plans in place for crisis communications if something, bad were to happen that was negatively impacting the reputation. I say this a lot, especially in this industry, when it comes to reputational risk. I mean, it's a very complicated industry in higher ed with the number of stakeholders, that are very engaged in what's going on. I mean, you have students who, are, students in the respective universities, and then you have parents who are also, very involved, probably from a tuition perspective. And then you have alumni, and then you have boards of trustees, and then you have faculty. And so, it often can create the perfect storm if something goes wrong, because the number of, people that have a stake in the game and are very interested. So this is always one that, we spend a lot of time with universities on, really thinking through the various facets, and helping to be better prepared in the event that, anything negative would go wrong from a reputational perspective. So Jake, back over to you. I think the next one we're going to talk about is operational risk.
Yes, thank you. So on the next slide here, operating model risks really stem from ineffective or inefficient processes, people, systems, governance, culture, really that come together to impact an institution's ability to function efficiently and effectively. And some of the risk factors that we note on the next slide are on the left-hand portion. And I want to call out third parties and outsourcing. As schools increasingly come under pressure to look at their operating and business models, there is been an increased focus on using third parties and outsourcing some of university operations. What comes with that is an exposure to known and sometimes unknown risks through this increasing reliance. And while you have an eye on managing costs to improve the business model and operating model, you are therefore also introducing risks from third-party vendors that may not have the same business processes or principles that you do. So you're while widening the aperture, you're also introducing more risks. And something that ties directly into that one is the cybersecurity risk noted on the last there. So higher ed institutions are huge generators of intellectual property through the sponsored research that often comes from either governments or commercial sponsors. And the leakage of potentially some of this personally identifiable information or ransomware can really hurt a university's reputation and therefore kind of its existence as in terms of a research institution. So those are a couple there. And Cynthia, over to you to talk about how ERM can help with some of this.
Yeah, so, and Jake, I'm going to go ahead and go through the two examples that you focused on. The first, how ERM can help with third-party and outsourcing risk. And the first thing that I'll say about that, and the most prevalent thing that we see in the industry is first just actually with that risk, helping institutions realize that it is a risk. Oftentimes, higher ed institutions will think that if they have worked with a third party to outsource certain operations, that the risk kind of goes with the third party. And so helping them to understand, that if something, were to occur, the risk were to actually be realized, that, it will come back to the university. It won't just stay, in the confines and realm of that third party. Some other very specific, tactical things that we do to help with understanding and being better prepared for third party outsourcing risk. To conduct a comprehensive mapping and assessment of the risks that are posed by all university leveraged third parties. So, understanding who the third parties are that they are working with, and then understanding, the specific risk and assessment of them. And then, the other item we do is validate sufficient governance and agreements that are aligned with risk appetite exist for these services that are outsourced to third parties. And then, moving to cyber, which is huge issue, cyber risk across not just higher ed, but, many industries. And, a lot of alignment going on now between enterprise risk management programs and how they align, back to cyber risk programs. But some of the ways that ERM can help, being better prepared for cybersecurity issues, analyzing data and security policies, cybersecurity policies and processes to validate that the protocols are up to date and being executed appropriately, both internally and externally. Another, tactical item is to support documentation and consideration of risk posed by the migration of systems and applications that do house personally identifiable information and other sensitive data to new cloud platforms. Obviously, a higher education institution, very typically holds a lot of personally identifiable information related to each of its students. So having the proper protocols in place with that. And then, the other thing that we see is security teams that are using tools such as business continuity, wargaming, crisis communications, and post-crisis recovery to help institutions remain prepared and resilient to mitigate, threats as they relate to cybersecurity. So those are some very tactical components of how ERM can help, but did want to bring those up as part of this. So again, Jake, back to you, student enrollment.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cynthia. So as we talk about the next enrollment supply, and again, keeping in mind that this paper was largely generated with U.S. higher ed institutions in mind, but looking at the United States and what we did for our paper as a whole is experiencing a net decline in high school graduates, and it's most concentrated in certain parts of the country. And at the same time, the population of adults with some college or no college degree is at an all-time high. So as institutions prepare for their short and long-term strategies, they're going to need to identify new areas of opportunity. And that's really a lot of what this risk talks about, in addition to the risks that are associated with that. So on the next slide, there's a couple of sub-risk factors. The first of which that I want to call attention to, and this is important because it ties back to some of the other risk buckets that we spoke of earlier, particularly alternatives to traditional higher education. I mentioned that within the business model, as universities start to pivot and think through how they're going to be more sustainable, the rise of predominantly online or private for-profit or not-for-profit universities that provide this anytime, anywhere education and learning largely via online delivery is a direct challenge to the traditional higher education model. And so as universities think about their educational delivery mix, which we spoke of in the business model bucket, you need to also think about how that impacts your enrollment supply. And then in addition to that, it ties in also very closely is market demand. The economic variables of these educational offerings and how they're viewed in the market. Some students are looking, and an increasingly large portion of students are looking at this long-term investment against what they can do in the marketplace right now. And largely what you're seeing is a lot of challenging the value of a college education, which in turn impacts the enrollment supply of students that are thinking about going to a four-year institution, or are they going to go and do some certification or forego college in general to work at some startup not-for-profit. So you're seeing the pipeline of students shrink and diversifying what they're going to do in the marketplace, which is a direct hit to the traditional higher ed institution, and universities need to be thinking about that. So Cynthia, can you expand a little bit more on how our ERM can help with some of these risks?
Yeah, thanks, Jake. And again, as Jake mentioned, specifically, in the US, this has been, I would say one of the top 3 risks that, we have heard is top of mind for risk officers, provosts, and deans, for many of the reasons that Jake just walked us through. I would also say that this has been further exacerbated by COVID-19 as a top of mind issue. And, again, getting into some very, tactical things of how enterprise risk management can help. You've heard this theme all morning, evening, is, being better prepared by just understanding the data and the trends in the data. And so, what we've done with a lot of our university partners is, help them to identify trends in enrollment over time, and develop things such as key risk indicators to identify, areas of risk where there could be, or we are starting to see substantial declines. We've also analyzed areas of declining enrollment to determine factors that are influencing those variations. And, you know, a third thing is to identify areas of opportunity for high interest programs that might help to increase enrollment or further diversify program offerings. But, you know, again, with all of that being said, you know, some key concepts here is, you know, key risk and indicators to identify trends in enrollment, you know, increases or declines. And a lot of that, you know, is really paying attention to the environment that you're operating in, external factors that could be, you know, getting involved with that. And then again, being able to better respond. So Jake, back to you for the last two risk issues that we were going to talk about today.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. So this next one here is compliance risk. And I think tied in with the enrollment supply, I want to keep in mind that this was largely developed with US higher institutions in mind. And what we're really talking about here is with the regulatory landscape being increasingly more complex, adherence to compliance and allocating the appropriate resources really is critical, because the risk of being non-compliant can hit a lot of other risk factors that we had spoke of earlier, whether it's reputational risk, whether it's ultimately the business model, depending on how bad the regulatory or the compliance impact is. And so when you think about compliance, think about the cost of compliance. And that's a lot of times what we talk to clients about, is putting the appropriate resources in there to make sure that you are meeting the compliance requirements. And so we're not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail here, because our examples, as noted within the paper, are largely US focused, but keeping the compliance risk in mind relative to what the resource allocation and the cost of that would be is an important driver. And then next, I'll jump into the last bucket here, and we just want to touch on this really briefly. It's not noted within the paper, but we are hearing this increasingly more, and it's student well-being risk. Noted on the next slide here, and that when you think about it, higher ed institutions are a collection of you know, students that bring 18 plus years of their lives with them. They come to campus at a pivotal point in their lives, and oftentimes struggle with well-being and mental health. And so to the extent the universities are prepared to meet those demands, whether it's providing counseling services, providing programs, students are expecting universities to be prepared to meet their needs when it comes to well-being and mental health. And this is something that we plan to dig in further when we go and update this POV this year, this paper this year, and we will be digging in further. Cynthia, is there anything you want to add there in terms of the mental health and well-being risk bucket?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, kind of stating the obvious, but this with COVID-19 has increasingly become, you know, a bigger and bigger concern. So, you know, as I mentioned, there are a few of these risks that, you know, I think we were hearing and seeing a lot of concern around when we, you know, set out to put this paper together, which was before COVID-19. And many of these, I think, have just exacerbated, you know, with, you know, the environment changing, you know, and students, you know, being asked to participate in an educational delivery model that may not have been what they thought they had signed up to be participating in, you know, and obviously all the things that we're reading about, you know, with students, you know, having to social distance and live in dorms, and, you know, you get into some new issues that none of us could have ever projected. But again, this one kind of US based at this point, we think.